Part of my job is to visit a lot of churches. When you work on the staff of a bishop, there are 88 churches in Washington, but I was doing some math on the plane, and I've probably visited about somewhere between 40 and 50 churches or dioceses in the country. And I've actually done a lot of Harry Potter events. But this is another whole level. You know, I am not in Kansas anymore. You know, there's a phrase when you teach the Christian faith that is very famous, if any of you have ever studied how to teach the faith, from one of our great teachers in the Episcopal Church, a man named John Westerhoff, and he's credited for a great phrase that says, faith is caught, not taught. Faith is caught, not taught. Now, first of all, that's very good Trinitarian theology, because that's a reference to the Holy Spirit moving through the world that catches you up like a leaf that's just still on the ground, and when the wind comes, all of a sudden it takes off, it takes up, it even dances. That's what it means to be caught. And we finally realized in the church that you could have a great Sunday school for 25 minutes a week, or you can come to a Bible study that's maybe 40 minutes a week, but that is not how you become with your whole body and soul a follower of Jesus. It's part of it. It's like broccoli or grain in the food pyramid. But what makes a Christian, remember, a Christian is also, we forget this sometimes, a person. A person. What fills that person with faith is not a class or a program or a ritual. A community catches you up. Quite often when you're sad or lonely or in the hospital, it actually comes and rescues you. But on a daily basis, the reason we gather together is to be like an orbit where the planet that is larger has more mass and more strength. So that when people even walk in the door, they start saying things like, this place feels different. These people feel different. I'm looking around and a lot of you are really strange. First of all, anyone that attends a religious community on a regular basis, you are already statistically strange. So already, I look at how many of you are in here. The average Episcopal Church in America has 87 members. You're already larger than the average Episcopal Church just for this event. The average Episcopalian is 57 years old. Yeah. And a lot of churches I go to, a lot of the churches are within 10 years. Everyone in the room is within 10 years. So you're already strange in that. So I just want to bear witness as someone who is like a church visitor. You are beautifully, miraculously, sacredly strange. And I'm not even talking about the costumes. And the deep, dark secret is very few of you had to buy anything for tonight. Just saying. For 20 years, I was a high school chaplain, actually. And only in the last few years have I decided to work with grown-ups. I thought it would be so different, actually. Instead, it's just sort of like chaperoning the prom with the lights on. And I wrote a book about teenagers and their spiritual lives. And I'm telling you, by the way, that this is my Harry Potter testimony, and I want you to be thinking tonight about your own. It's very ironic. Between I was doing a doctorate, and between the year about 2000 and about 2008, I wrote a book on adolescent spirituality, and I didn't do anything with Harry Potter. I missed the first book, and then the second came out, and everyone's like, you can't read the second until you read the first. I don't really like reading, actually. I mean, like fiction. Bless you. And not just because you sneezed. I'm just not like a big reader, like what are you reading? That NPR question. I'm not that kind of person. I Google what I need to know. And so then the third book came out, and they were just kind of getting, there was like an obesity crisis in America with that series before it hit the rest of us. And then the first movie came out, and then all the book snobs were like, don't see the movie till you see the books, it's so different. So I didn't see the first movie because I hadn't read 7,000 pages of the other books yet, and the second movie came out, and then I did what most people do when they've missed a trend. You get resentful and you become a jerk. So then it was like, oh, I'm not one of those Harry Potter people. So for a decade, I ignored it. So I never saw any of these movies in the theater, didn't read the books. And one week, we had at this high school, here's something you've all heard of, homecoming week. Anybody? Bueller? Yes? Right. Okay, if you are a chaplain or a spiritual leader, this week sucks. If you care at all about the spiritual life of a person, this is the worst week ever. Even if you are the king and queen. In fact, the people who are kings and queens, now that I've been in education for 30 years and I know them now in their 30s and 40s, they hated it too. Because the expectations and the nonsense put on them, they didn't enjoy the week either. All of a sudden, these funky schools that have like a national coming out day, like an environmental club, for 1 week, every school in America becomes a school in the 1950s. Right? You don't talk about it. You don't talk about the debate team or the science club. It's about a football game and a dance and a dress, maybe. Maybe a hotel room. The whole week, all that you do all year is undone. I hate homecoming week. It is like, gird your loins, chaplains. Everyone's self-esteem, because high school teachers have like a PTSD from their week. They're mean that week too. But they all have themes. Do you remember this? And by the way, you're working on all this multiculturalism, and they pull out all these ethnic tropes. Like there's like a Hawaiian week, and everyone walks around with like leis and like belly dancing and stuff. Like 2 weeks later, we're going to have like a talk on post-colonialism in the Caribbean, right? But not that week. Right? These random themes, right? Pirates, do you know what I'm talking about? Well, a couple of years ago, the theme was going to be Harry Potter. I thought, here it is. These people will not let this thing die. The books are done, the movies are done, she's cashing in. I said, does anyone even care about Harry? I said this in the meeting. Does anybody even care about Harry Potter anymore? It's like 2 or 3 years ago. Even my own colleagues just looked at me. It was as if I had just offered smallpox to everybody. So I was a little defensive. I came in Monday morning ready to do what you do in homecoming week, punish people, give detention, stop bullying, fight racism, tell the gay kids it's okay. You could just be a queen in a different way. I came in, the whole school was decorated like Hogwarts, which to me, I'm going to be honest, I'd never heard that word. It sounded like a sexually transmitted disease, I'm just going to say. I mean, to you regulars, maybe. But, and that word was on the school. I'm like, take that down. It just felt kind of like an illness. I go walking through this school, and the school is decorated kind of like yours. They were JV compared to that hallway, let me just say. But something like that. Most of the time, if you're a chaplain, you walk around that week, and you've got 2 things you have to do. You have to punish kids for ripping down decorations, right? Well, I saw that there was one of the decorations, and by the way, there were these educational proclamations around, and they were all dumb. All of them were dumb. I'm like, why are they dumb? Why are you hanging signs that say dumb things? I walked by the dean of students, and there were these ribbons and paper plates that had pictures of cats on them, lots of cats. And they had these little things they could spin. Our dean of students is just like this dude who was like 45. I'm like, I didn't even know he had cats. And I didn't know he had 12. I actually asked I told someone that you've got something on your forehead, you just gotta, like they had the whole costume, like if you're gonna get all dressed up, you could at least like wash your face, you've got a mark on your forehead. So I didn't know what was going on this week. But when the first decoration fell off, as I went to figure out who did it, 2 kids dropped their book bags, ran to the wall, and fixed it. I've got my little pad to put you in jail for a little bit, and then one of them had bought tape to carry all week on his belt to fix any decoration that fell all week. By the first hour, I was walking around like, what is going on? I'm out of state, so I can say it. Black kids were talking to white kids. You normally only see black kids and white kids together for the picture, for the calendar. You know what I'm saying? Random acts of diversity photos. Just saying. Bus drivers had wands. The guy mowing the lawn had a robe. And he's talking in broken English to the varsity captain of the wrestling team about reading Harry Potter to his grandson in Spanish. More kids went to the pickup Quidditch game at lunch. And by the way, Quidditch, I was like, bless you. Then went to the mandatory pep rally. So I was walking the halls giving people detention for hiding in the bathrooms during the pep rally, because that's what you do. And the entire school voluntarily went out to watch this sweeping of the field, I thought. Then there was the dance. Now, as a chaperone, your job is very simple. You are just a moving contraceptive device. It's the simplest day of teaching. Let me just say, people came in robes or gowns. It was a ball. It wasn't a girl-boy thing. Groups of houses came. Teams. There was something like a tri-wizard something or other, but like teams went to, and the lights were mostly on. And as for the dresses, I'd never seen so much fabric. Because that's kind of not a thing anymore, fabric, just in general, just less is less. I called my mother, who is also a teacher, who'd been a teacher at that time for 50 years. I called her and I said one thing, Mom, Harry Potter took on homecoming and won. So I watched the movies. We had Monday off because it was homecoming weekend. I think it's 24 hours and 17 minutes, by the way. You'll find that one of the many things that your rector and I have in common is a complete lack of interest in moderation. So I finished the movies like mid-morning Monday or something. Because as a chaplain, everything I cared about, everything I thought an institution that was an Episcopal school could do for people to share the life of Jesus with them, and you'd know that you were getting it right, you'd know the tree by its fruit. Every single thing I saw all week from Harry Potter was what I had been trying for 15 years to create through ministry. That narrative alone did more for peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, and self-control than any lesson and any chapel. I started the books, and in a few days got through 4,116 pages, 199 chapters. I couldn't read it fast enough. I couldn't believe I'd missed it. So I'm a late bloomer. This is a long way of saying if you don't know the stories, if you haven't started, it's never too late. And trust me, you can make up for lost time. And then I started speaking at a church about Harry Potter, and then someone asked if I would come to speak at their church. And now probably 40 or 50, actually no, I've probably done at this point closer to 60 or 70 Harry Potter events. I finally wrote a book about using Harry Potter to talk about theology, but it really is all what happened in that high school. The most important thing is always God. Always God. God says, apart from me, you can do nothing. These stories can't do anything. I'm a Narnia fan, Lord of the Rings, I mean, all the fandoms, we could be here for days. They are a means to an end, to the Alpha and to the Omega. But we'll get there. Let me just get you all ready, though, for your Baptist friend either this week now or the following week, who when you tell them what happened at your church, you might feel a little on the defense. So, here's your answer. We talk about Harry Potter in the Christian church, in the Anglican theology, and in the Episcopal community because it is biblical. Now that will probably close some of the rings on the watch of your Baptist friend. Biblical. Remember the event of Pentecost. Remember what happened? You had the disciples, the followers of Jesus, right? Men and women in a public place, and they want to tell people about Jesus, but they're surrounded by people from all different countries. Do you know that reading? That's the reading you don't want. Frisian, Phrygian, Cretan. That's the reading you give to someone you don't like. You're like, oh, do you want to read today? They're like, yeah. You're like, that's the Pentecost reading. It's a shout out to every impronounceable country at the time. But whenever the Bible gives you a list, it's always doing the same thing. It's saying there's lots of different kinds of people. And you remember, all those people showed up, and there was a miracle. Remember, this was the first day of the church. And the miracle was, a lot of you know the story, that all the people who came, who spoke all these different languages, could understand this small tribe of people speaking Aramaic, things like that. Now be very careful, though, how you interpret that miracle. The miracle was not that a dozen followers of Jesus could find in that diverse area other people who also spoke Aramaic. Right? Do you see that? The miracle wasn't God gave everyone the ability to understand the disciples. This is important, people, because if you don't get down in your head what happened to that miracle, you're going to be doing your Christian life and ministry wrong. You're going to be exhausted, and you're probably going to quit church after a day or a decade. If you really believe the church started, and what God did to say, this is how we're going to do church, is we're either going to wait or we're going to wonder how long it takes for everyone to speak our language. And you think your job in the world is to go out and explain Christianity enough times so that everybody speaks you have misread the miracle. The miracle was that the people who spoke Aramaic on the spot could speak their language. The person who speaks Phrygian heard the story of Jesus in Phrygian. The miracle was that the church could speak their language. That's how they understood. 800 million people have purchased a Harry Potter book. And since a lot of those are libraries, over 1 billion people have read these stories. Harry Potter fans are the third most populous nation in the world. That is, my friends, a legit language. So you tell your friends of a different temperature of the Christian faith who wonder why you decided to spend an evening basking in witchcraft. First of all, that's cool. I had one parent come up to me and said, I'm not letting my kid take your class because you're teaching witchcraft. And I was like, I would love to do that. Like, I wish I could do that. It turns out that was not a way to do that conversation. It's biblical that God has so much love for the world that some of us, if you can become fluent in Harry Potter, please do. And remember why the follower of Jesus becomes fluent in anything. to tell the story of Jesus to people who speak that language. Do not leave people in that language unaware of this story. Rowan Williams has a great phrase. He's an Anglican writer, the former Archbishop of Canterbury. He said, the sole job of the church, I love this, is to create people who can accept all that God wants to give. That's what we're doing when we tell people about Jesus. We're helping them become the kinds of people who can receive what God wants to give. So speak Harry Potter. A lot of you, I'm looking, are already fluent. But don't speak Harry Potter because you want to make it an idol. Speak Harry Potter because that's one more person. And we could talk forever, I'm sure, of how many times you've been able to communicate to someone something about God, and you could do it in Harry Potter language. So we're not doing this because we're taking a vacation from the Bible for Friday night, and we'll all get back on the program on Sunday. We're here because this is exactly what a Pentecost church does. By the way, if everyone on your street cross stitches, you need to be fluent in cross stitching. If everyone on your street cares about legal representation for undocumented people, you need to be fluent in that. I suggest Harry Potter because it is the third largest nation in the world. Chances are you're going to go somewhere and see someone who can hear about Jesus in that language. Okay, so that's your biblical reason for why we're having the night we're having tonight. I want to say quickly, though, something about the world in which we live and why it is that Harry Potter works. A lot of you know you love Harry Potter, but I'm here for a few minutes to try to explain to you why. Why you came tonight. Why you're wearing elf ears and feeling okay with it. Because that was kind of a kitchen dinner thing and you nailed it. But you're still wearing the ears. Why is that a thing? I'm about to tell you why it's a thing. She is designed to wear those. I'll get there. Even you look, you're like, I'm actually just wearing them on my head. Stay tuned. I have two pictures here for you to look at before we dive deep into who J.K. Rowling is and why she wrote these stories. And she is, by the way, Anglican. She's one of ours, so to speak, and she still goes to church. 7% of people in Scotland attend church. By the way, most of Europe is single digits in weekly church attendance, but she's one of them. This is the original crest of the oldest college in America. So this is the original Harvard College motto. Harvard was founded to train ministers in 1636. Look at this motto. Latin scholars, my friend. Here we go, veritas, okay? Truth, veracity, right, in English? Christo et ecclesia. This is, if you know Latin, this is a purpose clause. Christo et ecclesia. Truth for Christ and the church. Right? Makes sense? You're here to seek truth for Christ and the church. This is not the motto anymore. But for 300 years, this was the motto. Notice a few things, stare for a minute at the veritas, and let me show you the motto right now. And by the way, the reason I picked Harvard is the oldest college in the country, and there's something going on with this motto that is the story of our culture. This is it. This is the shield now. One more time. The shield was the shield now. On the old shield, the two books on the top were the Old Testament and the New Testament. The third book, if you notice, is face down. And it is below what's called a chevron. That's that mark, a demarcation. The idea was there's much to know in books. Read them all. And there are things you will never know. That's why the book is face down. So learn a lot and know that there are mysteries that you will not know until you see God face to face. Now we see in part is the top. Then we will know fully as we are fully known. This was a humble shield. It also has the convenience of being true. And it wasn't seek truth, your truth, my truth, anybody's truth. Why? Because truth is found in Christ and the church. Because the church is the body of Christ. This was a way. It's a creed. But somewhere in the early 20th century, the books are all opened. The barrier to mystery is gone. And it's just truth. And in my experience, I went to Harvard. In my experience, seeking truth is much more popular than finding it. In fact, finding truth is seen as closing your mind. Closing your mind. I've often said it is closing something. I'm married, and I remember the day I got married, I made a decision to marry one person and to, at that same moment, no longer marry anyone else on the face of the earth. So you could look at that wedding day and say, gosh, that's the day where she said no to everybody else. Yeah, that's one way to look at it. I was pretty happy to commit, to have found a truth and then swear to it as a sense of freedom, not limitation. But this is the limitless motto. Just keep searching. Everything is true, nothing is true. I put this up here because it is no surprise that this motto was what it was for 300 years, but in just the last 75, it's changed. This is the culture in which we live, my friends. We have so much transparency, so much posting. Everything is open. There's this sense if you just study long enough and learn enough, right? The World Wide Web says just keep searching. But the truth is, we as Christians know that first of all, searching, come and see, taste and see. Jesus invites you to search. Jesus invented curiosity, people. But as Christians, we believe that there is freedom in finding and celebrating the truths that God gives us. And it doesn't mean that other things become not true. If you are my neighbor, it is also not true that I can ignore you or that your humanity doesn't matter. Recognizing things are true liberates you and others. Jesus said, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Now, why do the Harry Potter stories work? Why are you here? Why do you actually own a lot of the stuff you're wearing right now? Why have you been the same thing for Halloween many years in a row? C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien and others had a phrase. They said that in all the stories of the world, there's what's called the good myth. Have any of you ever heard this? The good myth? And what they mean is that the story of Jesus coming to the world, loving, dying for, and saving the world, being resurrected, that this is a true myth. And what they meant by myth is because it happened in history, every other myth relates to it. Now, if a myth doesn't, it's not going to have that same power. So what they meant was why have 1 billion people read Harry Potter and 1 billion have not read Hunger Games? No offense to Hunger Games, it's very intriguing. A lot of you have read it. But it did not take off. Hunger Games is a pretty depressing read. It's called dystopian, which is just an expensive word for depressing as all hell. You know, and the city in it is called Panem. And so for a Christian, this is very painful. The actual place of corruption is called the bread. That's how far that narrative is from anything that has to do with the story of Jesus. That bread is rotting from the inside. It's not the bread of life. It's the kind of bread when you eat it, it will kill you. If you take in the culture of Panem, it will kill you. This is I like Hunger Games, but it is an anti-myth for the Christian vision of the world. So why does this matter? C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien, so Lewis writes the Narnia Chronicles, which never mention Jesus, but do you see he would call that a great myth because it points on the Lord of the Rings. Very complicated. Remember, C.S. Lewis and Tolkien were friends. Toward the end of their life, their friendship broke up. And one of the reasons they broke up was because Tolkien thought the Narnia Chronicles were too simplistic. And Lewis thought The Lord of the Rings was a bit rough for the average reader. So Tolkien teased Lewis and said, your stories are too simple. And Tolkien, you know what he said about the Lord of the Rings? He said, those stories are my meditation on the Trinity. Did you get that? I kind of missed that. I mean, the three occurs a lot. But they're very, very thick and dense. So Lewis said, let's write, for some people do Narnia, some people do Lord of the Rings, but Tolkien just believed Christianity was such a beautiful system, it was cheapened by the Chronicles of Narnia. But both of them were trying to use fiction to teach the faith. So think about that in your own life. If you could think right now about story, like the Velveteen Rabbit, I've heard people say that. Think of stories that they touch you in a kind of theological place. They make you think of hope and love and resurrection. And Lewis and J.K. Rowling believe these stories they're resurrection stories. J.K. Rowling called the Harry Potter series, and not the next movies that are coming. Does that make sense? She was very clear that the original 7 books, she said that is a resurrection story. Now, it never mentions Jesus, but it's what Lewis called a good myth. So, that's why they work. This story works because it rhymes with a resurrection narrative. It rhymes with it. I wonder if any of you have ever heard of this book, by the way. This is called The Pilgrim's Progress. Did any of you ever heard of this? This book was written by John Bunyan in the late 1600s, early 1700s. If you go to colonial America from 1650 to about 1850, the most common book you found in homes was not the Bible, which was expensive and treasured. The most proliferated book was Pilgrim's Progress. Don't go read it. This is just, it's not very, it's very boring. I'm sorry, it hasn't aged well. But it's the story of a guy named Christian who does that, like he kind of, it's a little bit like the Wizard of Oz. He goes through a magical world, and he encounters all these virtues like lying or stealing, do you know what I mean? And he's supposed to make friends with like kindness and forgiveness. Like it's a teaching tale. Does that make sense? But he looks and dresses the way people were looking and dressing when it was read. Does that make sense? Like, so you have the Bible, but you're a little kid who's 8 years old, and if you read the story of Christian has to go get coals for the fire. You know, he's got to take care of the horses that smell. Here's my point. The Bible, even in Puritan Pilgrim America, never stood on its own. It never taught itself. Children were never taught the scriptures in 380 years of American history alone. They had a story, they had a narrative of someone who was not in the 1st century or the 3rd century before Christ. Someone who dressed like them, spent the day like them, and that narrative, that fiction story, taught them how to read the Bible and why. So I just want you to be clear. This is the Harry Potter of 200 years in America. So don't let anyone tell you, like, I don't know why you need some fiction story. The Bible is enough for me. Just look at them and say, have you ever thought about American history? Because even the Puritans, who burned each other for even saying bad things about the Bible, had more of these at home than the Bible. This is how you learned how to follow Jesus. A narrative. So, why Harry Potter? It's just our Pilgrim's Progress. The Bible is not so easy to read. It's not self-interpreting. Jesus is remarkably silent on in vitro fertilization. This is why we have liturgy in our church, so that our bodies can participate in the truths that we read in the scriptures and that have been passed down to us. And our bodies can help us understand. Lazy liturgy is dangerous because it's saying, I don't care, I don't need my body to help me understand the scriptures. It's just a head thing for me. But then you're stuck with saying, Isaiah doesn't say a whole lot about non-state actors with terrorist aims. We need common contemporary stories to help us. And you found one. Some of you right now are wearing one. You still got the ears on, right? I see, right? Very quickly, there's a Bible verse, I don't know if any of you have heard it. We have eternity written on our hearts. The Bible thinks you are made for stories, to hear stories, to tell stories. You're designed. Why is she wearing those elf ears? We are designed for a story. Come and see, taste and see. Zacchaeus, come out of the tree. Woman, come up from the well. Woman, come out of the crowd. Centurion, drop your sword. Follow me, drop your nets. Let's fry a little fish here on the beach. Everything is come and walk, come and see. Christianity is an invitation into a story. That doesn't mean it's fake. Remember, C.S. Lewis said, the imagination is the organ of meaning. Very quickly, a lot of you probably, this is a little fuzzy picture, just to give you an idea that other people besides the church have figured out that we are wired for stories. Wired. This, there's that Harvard New Shield again. This is called the Facebook. This is actually, I took this. This is on my shelf at home. For decades, when you went to Harvard, you had to send a passport picture of yourself in August because they made a yearbook of all the incoming freshmen, and you had to put your name, your address, and what high school you went to, because this was, you know what it was actually called? Right? It was called the Facebook. And the Facebook was just like this. And there was so much stress in August when you were a freshman because you knew that they only printed it once. So people would look you up. That's how they would look up who you were for your whole 4 years of college. So, I mean, you took so many different versions of your profile picture and they sent and they bound it. This was pre-internet, pre-anything like and then that was it. So, you know, your name, address, and where you went to high school. And the Facebook existed for decades, and then they made it digital. And then Mark Zuckerberg was like, who was a sophomore at the time, and he got this great idea. He said, why don't we hack in to the university and get the digital Facebook pages and take out all the women and pair them up and let people rate how pretty they are. And he called that the Facebook. And people knew what it meant on campus, which is that it was cut and pasted out of the Facebook. And the university went crazy. He got in all this trouble. And then he actually left Harvard and instead hacked into 4 colleges and got their digital Facebooks and created a very closed community called Facebook. But you had to be invited by someone from one of the 4 colleges in the early 2000s. So it was the Facebook. And remember, he called it the Facebook for a while. And now it's just called Facebook. And it's very funny because some people still have on their shelf the Facebook. Now, the reason I give you this is that how many of you are on Facebook or have a Facebook page? Yep. How many of you have gotten rid of it in the last few months? No. Remember when Facebook first started, you know what they called it? The wall. Do you remember? Depending how old you are, if you're really young in here, you're like, what are you talking about? It used to be called your wall. And there was a picture of you and things about you. And what's it now called? Now it's called your timeline. Facebook did millions of dollars of research and found out in the 20th century, the difference between the 20th and 21st century was that people want to see their lives as a story. So they changed the name from the wall to the timeline. So what I love is people in the church, we've known this for hundreds of years in America. We've known it for thousands of years. We are supposed to join into an epic story. We're made for stories. Facebook finally got it, and they changed their whole platform on what it's called because they know you want to be part of a story. When something started, you want to be reminded of dates. You know, those things come up and say, hey, remember what you did last year? Because this is their research the last couple of years. You want to see your life as an epic story. Remember, our faith is based on Holy Week. The whole year radiates out from Holy Week, one story. How do you go from Sunday when everyone is cheering for you and giving you their favorite little goat to ride on? Kills you on Friday, hides in the shame, and on Sunday, the universe will never be the same. And that narrative, we stretch it out into the liturgical year and take a whole season for each part of that week. But don't be fooled, the whole year grows out of the week. And in some ways, the whole week grows out of the sunrise and an empty tomb. And everything, the whole story builds out from there. My friends, let's go back to Latin. Anyone want to tell us what the motto is of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry? This is nominative. This is the subject. Anybody? Got a little gerund over here. Okay. Numquam. Never. Never. Titilandus. Anybody? Tickle. That's a very funny verb. I've actually never seen it used, but she found it. Numquam. Never tickle. Now we go to the subject. Dormiens. That's ing. A sleeping dragon. Never tickle a sleeping dragon. Why is this? I will give you one last idea before we talk about the church. Do not tickle a sleeping dragon. C.S. Lewis wrote an essay once called Walking Past Sleeping Dragons. And in that essay, he argued that if you just tell people about God, they're going to reject it because of the world we showed before. Do you know what I mean? The books are open. You can know everything. There's no mystery. You start talking about God and resurrection and eternal life, and people are like, nope. So Lewis said, you know what? Don't do that. Use fiction. And that's like tiptoeing around someone's skepticism. Don't wake that dragon, he said. Because the skeptic will jump out and say, I'm going to be nobody's fool. Nobody's got my back. I'm just going to be learning everything. I'm going to Google everything. He's like, don't do that. Tiptoe around. Do not wake a sleeping dragon. And he said, that's what theological fiction is. When you tell the story of God, but you never use the name. Remember, Lucy says to Aslan, how will I live back in London without you? And Aslan said, I brought you here to Narnia that you would know my name here. I go by a different name there. But I brought you here to get to know me so that you would know my name in that other place. So Lewis writes a whole essay that the reason to write stories is to tell people about God without waking up the skeptical dragon. And come on, the motto of Hogwarts, do not tickle a sleeping dragon. She puts in the motto what she's doing in these stories. I'm telling you about God and I don't want to wake up your skeptic. Because when you even tickle a skeptic, it doesn't turn out well. She's never explained why she picked this motto, except by saying she thinks it sounds silly. But the chances that she did not read that essay by C.S. Lewis are not very good. Let's just take a minute here to watch. For those of you, I tried to picture that some of you in here have never seen or heard J.K. Rowling speak. So I just have a brief introduction to both her stories and her voice. This just says there's spoiler alerts. We should have told you that at the beginning of this whole night. By the way, this is a documentary that's online for free. The entire documentary is on YouTube. It's called A Year in the Life. I recommend it highly because it's free. It's done in Britain, and there's an independent filmmaker who was a friend of J.K. Rowling, and he asked her, can I interview you? And she agreed, and it was the year she was finishing the last book, Deathly Hallows, and she agreed to let him follow her around for the last year. You see her finishing, typing the last paragraph of Deathly Hallows. So it's only 45 minutes, but go watch the whole thing at home because it is actually her finishing that book. But that's the voice of the guy you hear, this independent, it helps to have friends who know J.K. Rowling. This is just the opening scene.
November 2006. J.K. Rowling is working in secret on the final chapters of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows in a hotel room in Edinburgh.
Yeah, I've helpfully made the note for myself. This will need very serious planning. I don't know when I wrote that. And I was quite right in that.
The reason she's saying that, if you didn't realize, when she wrote the stories, she outlined all 7 books at once. And she has columns. I've seen these. When she dies, I cannot fathom what these are going to go for on auction. And she has each character's name and then 7 columns and what happens to them in each of the 7 books. So she had a whole draft. So what she's laughing is that she sat down to write each book, she would pull out the outline. So that was, she was joking. She'd gotten to the end of Deathly Hallows, and when she looked at the outline, it said, the rest of this will need serious planning. Do you know what I mean? So she sort of wrote the last scene, how it was going to end. But then at a certain point, you've got to write the 700 pages. So that's why she's laughing at herself.
The Harry Potter series has taken 17 years to write. It's an epic saga of childhood confusion, danger, and adventure. But it's more than just a children's story. Behind the witchcraft and the wizardry lies an intensely moral fable about good and evil, love and hatred, life and death. My name is James Runcie. I'm a writer and a filmmaker, and I want to find out the secret of J.K. Rowling's success. How has she done it? And where has it all come from?
You look really nice, Jen. Oh, thank you.
This is J.K. Rowling's country house in Perthshire. Once inside, I decided to start the film by asking a few direct questions. What's your favourite virtue?
Courage,
What vice do you most despise?
bigotry,
What are you most willing to forgive?
gluttony.
What's your most marked characteristic?
I'm a trier.
What are you most afraid of?
Losing someone I love.
What's the quality you most like in a man?
Morals,
What's the quality you most like in a woman?
generosity,
What do you most value about your friends?
tolerance,
What's your principal defect?
short fuse,
What's your favourite occupation?
writing,
What's your dream of happiness?
happy family.
The desire for a happy family comes, in part, from a difficult childhood. Like her orphaned hero Harry Potter, Joanne Rowling was brought up on a suburban British street, first in Yate, just outside Bristol, and then a few miles down the road in Winterbourne. The house even had a cupboard under the stairs.
Okay, that's her actual house. That is the cupboard that was under the stairs. There wasn't a lot of room in it, but the exact layout from the books and the movies they went back to the house where she was a child.
But unlike Harry Potter, Jo wasn't made to sleep there. She shares the same birthday as Harry Potter, the 31st of July. And together with her sister Di, endured similar childhood economies.
What were your haircuts like?
Oh, that's just wrong.
They were terrible.
That honestly, this
were
is
terrible.
child abuse.
They were
I
terrible.
don't want to show it though.
I've got it here.
But I
That's not right. That. Look at my fringe. I don't think anyone can stomach that for long.
If you're wondering, Jo is the one on the right.
If you weren't used to cutting hair, wouldn't you approach it in a gentle, slow manner?
Wouldn't you go to a hairdresser?
Well, maybe they could, but wouldn't you just cut it slowly and not attack it like a hatchet?
I do think you've come. Mine was always crooked, always.
Did you wear similar clothes?
Oh God, yes.
Different colours.
Yeah,
but
you always had pink, and I always had blue.
Because you were the boy, Jo?
Yeah,
Because you were the eldest?
yeah, and I was supposed to be a boy, so
Simon John.
I was supposed to be Simon John. I even know who I was supposed to be.
Oh, they told you?
Oh yeah.
She was a massive disappointment.
Yeah. And so then I said quite hopefully, and when Di came along, were you disappointed too? No. I said, was that because you found out it was quite nice to have a girl? No. So then I just went upstairs and wept.
Okay, I'm going to stop there. I wanted you to see them laugh. People that have met J.K. Rowling, they say one of the things that's so funny about her is she's a completely normal person. As the documentary goes on, it points out something that is crucial for us as Episcopalians. I see there's marks in the floor here in your carpet, and I see that there are 8 sides to the circle here, which is good news, which means I know what used to stand there and probably will be back there soon. That's a baptismal font. And I know does anyone know why the font has 8 sides? Quite often, if there's ever a roof above font, it has 8 sides. It's a symbol of baptism being the 8th day, the 7 days of creation, then you rest on the 8th day, get baptized and go for it. 8 is an important day. So the baptismal font goes right there. What you need to know about J.K. Rowling is she lived on Church Street. That was literally the name of the street, Church Street, because there was a church in the street, Anglican church. Her parents were not believers. Some say atheists, some say agnostic. She says they didn't care enough to even label themselves, which makes them a part of the largest growing religion in America, right? The fastest growing religion in America is no religion. So her parents were doing that before it was cool. She loved the church, St. Luke's, and she would hang out there with her sister when she was 8 and her sister was 7. And the priest there, who was definitely up to something, said, if you'd like to come in on Saturdays, I'll give you £1 each, like $1 each, to clean up the church after weddings and things. Now, of course, they're child labor laws. Don't freak out. So yes, that shouldn't have happened. But you know that's not why the priest was doing it. Her mother was dying of MS. Her father was a workaholic who couldn't handle that fact and was never around. So they hung around the church. And she looked at the stained glass windows, and she read the prayer book. And by the way, the prayer book she would have been reading then was not exactly great literature. But she loved it. And then she said, I want to join this church. And they said, you join through baptism. So she decided when she was 10 years old to be baptized. She went to a few classes at the church. She asked her parents, and they said they didn't care. Her younger sister didn't care. So she asked to be baptized on her own. And she was baptized on her 11th birthday. Now, you Harry Potter people should be freaking out right now. There's no surprises that you got your Hogwarts letter when you turned 11. Because your Hogwarts letter didn't make you a witch or a wizard. Your Hogwarts letter announced your destiny from the beginning of time. It is the baptism into who you are, where you will begin to learn and grow into community and realize there are other people who are like you. The baptismal font is your Hogwarts letter. That's the mailbox it comes in. That baptism makes you aware, makes your actual limbs aware of your destiny from the beginning of time that you were knit in your mother's womb. So if you got a Hogwarts letter tonight, that's why. And the reason it's sealed is because when you are baptized, what do? You are sealed as Christ owned forever. That's why your envelope is sealed. There are so many little Easter eggs like that in the Harry Potter stories. For the people who say that they're not about religion, that's ridiculous. It's not quite like Narnia. But of course, you know Hedwig. Hedwig, if you look up, is a saint, like a real saint. Hedwig is the what in the stories? Anybody? The owl. But in real Christian life, Hedwig is the patron saint of orphans. He gets Hedwig on his 11th birthday and loses Hedwig the day he becomes an adult. On his birthday, on his 17th birthday, that's when he loses Hedwig. But in that time where he realized who he was throughout his entire childhood, the bird that watched over him was the patron saint of orphans. Do you know how many saints there are to pick from? She's up to something. Now, let me just say, we're going to take a bit of a break, but what I wanted to end with right now is to tell you something important. I began by talking about that we live in a world right now that is very much, you have to take care of yourself. There is no mystery. There's just things we don't know yet. So what is the church? The church is this community. We gather around the font. I love that it's obviously such a part of your life that it's dented the carpet I hope it is putting the same dent in your imagination that when you leave and go out into the world, you realize you are a community of people that gathers around the font to find out who you are, and then gathers around the altar to feed on who you are. That's what we're doing. You guys are like, all of us, we're like an outpost in this world that God made and is beautiful. We do not hate the world. We're not Amish. To be Catholic or to be Anglican is to believe in the word and. Nature and grace, church and world, faith and reason. Catholics and Anglicans believe in the word and because we think that's what the incarnation is. It's God entering into something that is irreconcilable and reconciling it. That's why we come to church. Because we want to love the world God has given us to live in, or else you would have been beamed up. But we're all still here. So there's something to be done. God wouldn't leave you in a world that God had left. So how do we live in this world? You come in here. We remind ourselves who we are. We remind ourselves how we are. And very practically speaking, I've printed out for you something to carry around in your wallet or your pocket. Please take one. What these are, there's a quotation from J.K. Rowling. To remind you, if you haven't heard this quotation yet, it's this. We do not need magic to change the world. We carry all the power we need inside ourselves already. Remember, people said to Jesus, Jesus, some people say the kingdom of God is over there, and some people say it's over there. And you know what Jesus said to him? Do you remember? He said, people will tell you the kingdom is over there, and the kingdom is over there, and it's in the Republican Party, or it's in the Democratic Party, or it's in that march, or it's in that building. And Jesus said, I tell you, the kingdom of God is within you. If you remain in me, I will remain in you. So I love what she says. Don't be fooled. She's up to something here when she says we do not need magic. You have everything you need within you. Then it lists on the back a Bible verse for you, and it lists what are called the acts of mercy. And these are very, very practical things. That's why they go into your wallet, people. Christianity is not a moral enterprise. It is not a philosophical experiment. If someone in front of you is hungry, feed them. If someone in front of you is afraid, tell them fear not and give them reasons why. St. Paul says, be ready to have an answer for the hope that you have. So if you're not going to stay with us in the second session, and this is the end for you, but I hope that you stay in the second session after a break. But please keep that, because I'm going to be referring to it later in the evening. A reminder that following Jesus is a very practical thing. And there are little tiny suggestions on there as you move toward Christmas, moving into Advent, ways that you can show mercy, ways that you can be part of this community. Okay, we're going to take it like a stretch break now. Before we talk about just a few more things, this idea of the Hogwarts chaplain, where this came from, just so you know, because for those of you who are really animated by these stories, and it can change your life. And remember, it's not that Harry Potter has the power to change your life. Remember, the disciples say to Jesus, some people are praying in the name of John, and some people are praying in the name of other people. And Jesus said, are they being healed? There's only one good, and there's only one God. People find different ways to meet that God. The Hogwarts chaplain, that phrase, right after the election, the inauguration 2 years ago, I was sitting on my couch and I was depressed. I had a lot of friends. I work with immigrant communities in Washington, D.C. And that first travel ban at the end of the first week was going to mean people I knew could not go home to weddings and funerals of immediate families. So I'll tell you, in my life, I voted for both parties. I'll just be transparent. I'm the typical straight down the middle American. I voted Democrat and Republican for president for decades. So I'm not a partisan like that. But I was just depressed at what was happening. And all these stories were saying, you know, in America, people only listen to the news of people who agree with them. And I was sitting on the couch, and I just felt like, why can't I get my news? Because I didn't feel like any one particular network was speaking to me. Does that make sense? So everyone kept saying, like, yeah, everyone's always only watches the news from people they love. I'm like, I don't really have a news outlet. I said, imagine if a Harry Potter fan had a channel. Like, then I would be siloed like everyone else and only be getting my news from a Harry Potter person. And then I thought, imagine if it was an Episcopalian Harry Potter person. Then I could handle this news, if that's who my anchor was. So I'm married to a professor at the seminary as well, a professor of education. And I just said, it's too bad, you know, that I can't listen to the news from a Harry Potter fan who's an Episcopalian. And then I thought, let me Google it. So I went on YouTube, right? With 1 billion people and Episcopalians being so overread and overeducated, I'm like, somebody's already doing this. No one was doing this. So I went down to my basement and got this idea to create a character of the Hogwarts chaplain who would read the news each week from an Episcopal perspective, but they would do it from Hogwarts as the Hogwarts chaplain, just reading the news to muggles and witches all over the world. Because if you know the stories, you know there's the WWN, the Wireless Wizard Network. Remember, that's that underground. So I made this little recording in my basement that we were going to resurrect the WWN, and we were going to have this network of information for witches and wizards. And I changed it to the Word and Wizard Network. So the broadcast would have something that happened in the news, a big Harry Potter tie-in, and then some scripture and some theology. It's actually very funny. I did a funeral at Arlington National Cemetery. I do military funerals a lot because of where I am. So I had on like all of it, you know what I mean? Like the hat, the cassock, and I stop at the Apple store because I know I want to do this broadcast, but I don't know how to make a movie. So I come walking in, it was the winter, I had this cape on, remember, because it was the inauguration, it was January. So I made your rector look like dressed down. So I go right into the store, and needless to say, all the geniuses turned. And one guy thought I was Professor Snape, which is funny. I was like, we're doing the cassock before Snape, okay? But so I sit down, and there are 3 geniuses waiting to meet people. So like, what are you here for? And I whipped out my computer. I was like, I need to start an underground wizarding network of Harry Potter fans who believe in God and the sacraments because there's a Death Eater in the White House. And the 3 geniuses like fought to be the one who got to work with me. And in an hour, I knew everything about iMovie. They would not let me leave until I could do everything on iMovie because they're not allowed to be political, but they were helping me out. And I've got the collar on, they're like, you're a Harry Potter fan? This guy had everything pierced. Everything coming off his face was pierced. And he was like, you're a Harry Potter fan? And he looks at me, he's like, I'm Slytherin. I'm like, of course you're Slytherin. So we like sorted everyone in that place. But here's something, I'll just say funny, to let you know that the world is watching us. The world is watching people who believe in God. And if any of you know what this means, at the end of finishing the movie, I then said to the genius, how do I save my work? And the guy looked at me, he was like 21, he was like, oh. He's like, that's really cute. He goes, we have autosave now. Like it's actually saving while you're working. He said, we've figured this out over time, that programs aren't neutral. Does that make sense? The programs know you want to save your work. So no longer is there the keystroke of save. Does that make sense? He said, so I'm just sitting there, and then he starts staring at me. I was like, okay, so it's just saved automatically. He's like, yeah, no keystroke. And he wasn't moving, and I put my computer away, and I was like, is there something else? He leans over, he goes, why doesn't God work like that? Why the keystroke? If God's not neutral about wanting to be with you forever, why do we have to say something or do something? Why isn't it auto-save? And then I stayed another hour at the Apple store talking to the 3 geniuses about consent, being as important to God as it is to any liberal. And that one person's auto is another person's coercion. So I said, God is not neutral, but the desire that you would love freely the God who loves you completely means nothing is on automatic. And that doesn't mean God cares. What more can God do but come to earth and walk in solidarity with all the suffering of all time, take it onto the cross and be rejected and betrayed and killed? God can do no more than that for us. But nothing is automatic. That's the drama. That's why Dostoevsky can write 800-page novels, while some French guy wrote a whole 900-page novel about stealing a piece of bread. Life is complicated and painful. But we are free. So I love going to the Apple store. Now they see me coming. I now dress this way for the Apple store. I want to show you a quick clip now about the room of requirement, since we're in the room of requirement, and why I think the room of requirement is probably one of the best ways to think about the church that I've ever seen in English literature. There was one question at the break, though, that I want to address. J.K. Rowling, right after the last book was written, she was asked by an interviewer, actually from MTV News, something came up. The interviewer said, why is a Bible verse in the opening of Deathly Hallows? If you look, there's actually a Bible verse at the beginning. And Joanne Rowling looks at him and says, there's actually 2 Bible verses. Remember in the last book, if you know, they're on the gravestones of Lily and James Potter, and there's one on Dumbledore's family grave. The verse on Dumbledore's grave is from Matthew. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where your treasure is, that's a very Dumbledore idea. You will seek, remember, seeker, Quidditch. You will seek what is your treasure. The snitch, gold. So the whole Quidditch, understand the whole Quidditch situation is about seeking treasure. That's why she put that verse on Dumbledore's grave, and that's why Dumbledore gave the snitch to Harry. Dumbledore wanted Harry to be a seeker. J.K. Rowling wants everyone to be a seeker. On the other grave, Lily and James Potter, does anyone know, to Letter to the Corinthians? The last enemy to be defeated is death. Remember now, go back to the last book when Harry and Hermione go back on Christmas Eve to Godric's Hollow, right? Remember, they're going to look for the graves, and he sees it. Here's where, that might be the page where it is most obvious that J.K. Rowling really is up to something. Because Harry, listen to the verse, the last enemy to be defeated is death. Harry freaks out. He says, that's what Death Eaters think, right? They're trying to defeat death. But J.K. Rowling wants you to understand it so much that she has them have a conversation about his misinterpretation. Does that make sense? She doesn't want you to go on in the novel until you figure this out. So Harry says, that sounds like Death Eater. Hermione says, no, Harry, I don't think it means that. I don't think it means defeating death. I think it means life after death. It's like a ventriloquist or a puppeteer. J.K. Rowling puts her views right into Hermione, who says, I don't think it means that, Harry. I think it means you will live beyond death. Death will be defeated and you will live on. She says, I think. J.K. Rowling won't let you go then to Harry's sacrifice and the final battle with Voldemort. She stops you in that graveyard and says, are you all with me? Are you all with me? That you're seeking the truth, and that what will hold you back is fear of death. And I'm telling you right here in this graveyard, Harry, you will never be able to give your life up if you don't realize that in doing it, you lose nothing and you gain everything, because the only thing that can take anything from life is death, and death has had everything taken from it in the resurrection. Harry can't do anything until he leaves that graveyard and figures this out. And the interviewer from MTV was like, She was like, the whole of the Christian faith is summed up in those 2 verses. She said, and I put those 2 verses at the end because the whole of the series, she said, is an expression of those 2 verses. She like came out. And then the interviewer says, how come you never told anyone you were a Christian along the way? People have been burning your books for a decade. But her answer was my favorite answer. If I were a priest at a church and someone in my church gave this answer, I would be like, nailed it! She looks at him and says this, I didn't tell anyone I was a Christian because if you knew I was a Christian, you would have known how these stories end. So I've said nothing. They've burned my books in countries across the world and called me a witch. But that's fine. I didn't want to give away the ending. And she hasn't said much about religion since that interview with MTV. Not that she regretted it, but I agree. That was a mic drop. If you understand anything about Jesus, you would have known how these stories were going to end from the first chapter of the first book. But it would take Harry 7 books to realize it's not how he was going to kill Voldemort. One day he would realize in love, Voldemort was going to kill himself. And Harry just had to be the person saying, I will be willing to die if that's what needs to happen. So that's an answer to your question for those of you that leave here saying, was she a Christian? She is. Did she say a lot about it? No. Has she said much since? No. She wants everyone of any religion to be able to find truth in her stories. She says they're not Narnia, and she's denied that she wanted you to become a Christian. She said she wrote the books because it made her a Christian. It wasn't made to make you a Christian. It was to make her go deeper into her own faith, which she says happened. So much so that she didn't use Bible verses to the end. Even her own faith, does that make sense? Grew, and then the fruit was in the last book. Okay, I'm going to show you now the scene of when, in the room of requirement, first, Dumbledore's army has to form. So those of you that have seen the movies will recognize this is the formation of their, I'm going to call it their church. They don't have a building yet, but you don't either, and you guys are doing pretty well in here.
Hi. So, you all know why we're here. We need a teacher. Proper teacher. One who's had real experience defending themselves against the dark arts.
Why? Why? Because you know who's back, you tosspot.
So he says.
So Dumbledore says.
So Dumbledore says because he says. The point is, where's the proof?
Potter could tell us more about how Diggory got killed.
I'm not going to talk about Cedric, so if that's why you're here, you might as well clear out now. Come on, let's go. They're just here because they think I'm some sort of freak.
Wait, is it true you can produce Patronus charm? Yes. I've seen it.
Blimey, Harry. I didn't know you could do that.
And he killed a basilisk with the sword in Dumbledore's office.
It's true.
Third year, he fought with about 100 Dementors at once.
And last year, he really did fight off you-know-who in the flesh.
Wait.
I'm going to pause for a second here. What you've seen happen here, in about half the churches I visit in this country, what you have just watched does not happen. Nobody looks at someone else on Sunday or Thursday and either can or desires to explain how the power of God is changing their life. To the outsider, they would say, what the heck are you all saying in there then? If God is changing your life, why are you keeping that a secret? It's like all of you are, in the Harry Potter language, all of you are great secret keepers. But there is nothing about following Jesus that is a secret. Judas kept secrets. You see how that turned out. We are meant to share this. So one of the first things I love about how they come together as a community is they start saying amazing things that have happened. Who saw it? Who knew? We call these testimonies. One of my favorite churches that I visited recently, you know what they do? Once a month, instead of doing the epistle reading, they have someone share a 3-minute testimony of what God has done in their own life. which is kind of cool, right? To think of that as almost as a modern epistle. That's why they want to stay liturgically sound, so they don't, just once a month, they do this the bishop gave them permission to try this out. It has changed the life of this church. Once a month, someone stands up and it gives their 3 minutes. Think about how many people are affected. Their family has been practicing all week. You know what often happens if that guy is a lawyer or that woman is a surgeon? Most of their friends come to church. Does that make sense? Because they hear they're giving the story. So it's inviting people to church who love the person who's speaking, who've never come before. People of different religions or no religion at all. Their neighbors, their brother-in-law who came into town the weekend just because he happened to want to hear it. So new people are coming. People are seeing people talk who they've known in church for 20 years. And part of me is like, oh my gosh, have you guys not seen Harry Potter? Gosh, tell the story.
Look, it all sounds great when you say it like that, but the truth is most of that was just luck. I didn't know what I was doing half the time. I nearly always had help.
He's just being modest.
No, Hermione, I'm not. Facing this stuff in real life is not like school. In school, if you make a mistake, you can just try again tomorrow. But out there, when you're a second away from being murdered or watching a friend die right before your eyes, you don't know what that's like.
You're right, Harry, we don't. That's why we need your help. Because if we're going to have any chance of beating Voldemort.
He's really back.
First, we need to find a place to practice where Umbridge won't find out.
The Shrieking Shack?
It's too small.
Forbidden Forest?
Not bloody likely.
Harry, what happens if Umbridge does find out? Who cares? I mean, it's sort of exciting, isn't it? Breaking the rules.
Who are you and what have you done with Hermione Granger?
Hypothetically speaking, I may or may not have sat in a church meeting recently that went on for 96 minutes. I am still waiting for God to come up. Very important things came up. Buildings, taxes, parking lot pavement, a leaky roof. These are very important things. You're smart, I'll just stop there.
The room of requirement.
The what?
It's also known as the come and go room. The room of requirement only appears when a person has real need of it, and is always equipped for the seeker's needs.
So, say you really needed the toilet.
Charming, Ronald. But yes, that is the general idea.
It's brilliant. It's like Hogwarts wants us to fight back.
I'm hopeless.
You're just flourishing your wand too much. Try it like this. Expelliarmus!
will please copy the approved text 4 times to ensure maximum retention.
There will be no need to talk. No need to think, it's more like it.
Wands away.
Stunning is one of the most useful spells in your arsenal. It's sort of a wizard's bread and butter, really. So, come on then, Nigel. Give it your best shot. Good. Not bad at all, Nigel. Well done.
Don't worry. I'll go easy on you.
Thanks, Roland.
Come on, Ron.
Come on, Ron.
Come on, Ron.
One second. You're up.
Shut up. I let her do that. It's good manners, isn't it? It's completely intentional.
Those of you that know anything about church history, this is the first 3 centuries of the church. Dolores Umbridge, her name in the first period of the church is Nero. But they find a place, meeting under punishment, threat of expulsion, even torture. This is called the age of the catechumenate in Christian history. This sliding in and out of doors, this determined, you have to teach each other. And there's someone right here against you. Actually, you know, she's actually a little worse than Nero in some ways.
Now focus on a fixed point and try again.
Expelliarmus!
Very good. Keep your concentration. Great. A little higher.
I'm okay.
Expelliarmus!
Fantastic, Neville. Well done. So, that's it for this lesson. Now, we're not going to be meeting again until after the holidays. So just keep practicing on your own as best you can. And well done, everyone. Great work.
Well done, mate.
Thanks.
All right. Very good lessons on how to be the church. So I'll let you meditate on those things that you probably never thought maybe about the room of requirement as being the pre-Christian church. And what I mean by that is before Christianity in the 3rd and 4th century became the empire. What did it mean to follow and gather and be a community? And if you know anything about what's called the catechumenate, which is how the early church formed Christians, you can literally find the steps of the catechumenate in those scenes. That's why I sort of wrote it in there. Those of you who are really church geeks, you literally just walked through how we formed Christians for 3 or 4 centuries. I don't know that J.K. Rowling was necessarily thinking about that, the ancient catechumenate. That might be a bit much. But then it is just the grace of God that we have a lot to learn about forming this community. You'll also notice there's nobody ordained here except by experience and gifts. There is definitely leadership. There are 8,000 priests in the Episcopal Church. 8,000. And there's 1.6 million Episcopalians. So that's a nice way of saying what you do has a lot more to do with what Christianity is or isn't going to be than what the 8,000 do. Their job, our job, I mean, this isn't all a costume. Our job is to lead the rites and rituals of the altar and the font and the ambo to preach, but it's actually very specific work to feed the body of Christ. But just on the math, if this church is going to move forward and be the body of Christ, 8,000 pieces of a 1.6 million piece body are not going to do it. And the reason the Episcopal Church as a denomination has some of the most unhealthy clergy of any Christian denomination. We have more hypertension, we have more type 2 diabetes, we have more depression, we have more addiction than any other denomination. And if you wonder why that is, I think a lot of it is that, now this is something that wouldn't make a lot of sense to your church because I know enough about your church and how it works, in that I hung out with a lot of your clergy tonight and literally hung out with a lot of your clergy while a lot of this happened. That's about right. You all made this night happen. You were this room. Some of you are good at cooking. Even Harry, Hermione, and Ron, remember they let Hermione do the spells, Harry do the broom flying. I mean, they have different skills. So your church is already doing such an amazing job with this. I don't even know how many of you were involved for how many of the things I've seen tonight. That is the way to do it. You're the body. So if you haven't seen this part of the movies, I do suggest you go back because there are some lessons here on how to share the work. Any of you that know the movies and the books well enough to know Harry wouldn't last a day, maybe not an hour, in any of these books without friends. Neville learns to do things that no one else can do. Luna learns to do things that no one else can do. So the question for you is, what can you learn to do that no one else can do? What in your role in this community, if you are a member of this church, and if you're not, join. What can you do that no one else can do? Who's the Luna in here? Who's the herbologist in here? And if you're a member of another community, let me tell you something. Those of us who follow Christ, we want you, where you are, to find what God has called you to do. We're cheering for everybody to find that vocation. Let me, as you go off and leave tonight, though, I want to end on your personal spiritual life. So there are lessons here about how to be a community. The Dementor is something that J.K. Rowling invented, and many people who are literature scholars have said the two things that people who have studied her books that say are the best things about her books, one of them, moving pictures. People who are critics of, because by the way, there's lots of literature about boarding schools in England, and you know what I'm saying? Like, she's competing against, but literary scholars have said two things they find to be truly memorable in 20th century literature from her. One is the idea of moving pictures. They found that to be a nice innovation. The second was the idea of a parallel ministry of magic and a Muggle ministry, like a Muggle prime minister, and they thought that parallel is unique in English literature. But the last thing they said was the Dementor. And J.K. Rowling's been interviewed a lot, and she talks a lot about Dementors. And in her life, she struggled with depression. She didn't have depression in her family. She wound up a single mom. Her mother had died. She and her father still don't speak. Their relationship completely fell apart in her 20s. So J.K. Rowling's father is just wandering around England to this day and has no relationship with his daughter. So she had a lot of pain in her life, and she reached a point for about 9 months to a year where she was living in public housing, was on welfare, and was getting assistance for the government for her daughter, and she fell into a dark depression, and in that time she created the character of a Dementor. They're not alive, they just suck the joy out of you. Remember the description? You feel like all the joy has been sucked out of the world. And literary critics have said this character is so powerful for anyone that reads these stories, because every single one of you has a Dementor. An addiction, a lie about yourself, an eating disorder, financial distress, a sense of shame, Who knows? Everyone has them. So they say this is why this story touches people. You could be in the 3rd grade or you could be 93. Everyone has a Dementor, something that just kind of sucks the life out of you. And it was so important for her that she created this whole subplot of Dementors. Think about it. Think of the story of Harry Potter and Voldemort. Do you notice how you don't really need Dementors in this story? Does that make sense? It's like kind of an inessential character subplot. I think the stories would have been just as cool if there were no Dementors in them. But they were so important in her life, she puts them in, and therefore she puts in the Patronus charm. She actually takes the time to teach the reader how to fight a Dementor. Do you see how that wasn't necessary in the fight against Voldemort? But she's giving you a gift. So here's the scene where Harry asks Lupin to teach him how to deal with these Dementors. Now, Harry's problem is the Dementors seem to follow him more than others. Some of you feel that way in your own life.
Harry. You came. Now, are you sure about this, Harry? You know this is very advanced magic, well beyond the ordinary wizarding level.
I'm sure.
Well, everything's prepared. Now, the spell I'm going to try to teach you is called the Patronus charm. Did you ever hear of it? No? Well, Patronus is a kind of positive force, and for the wizard who can conjure one, it works something like a shield with the Dementor feeding on it rather than him. But in order for it to work, you need to think of a memory. Not just any memory, a very happy memory, a very powerful memory. Can you do this? Yes. Very well. Close your eyes. Concentrate. Explore your past. Do you have a memory? Allow it to fill you up. Lose yourself within it. Then speak the incantation Expecto Patronum.
Expecto Patronum.
Very good. Shall we? Wand at the ready.
Expecto Patronum! Expecto! Expecto!
Here we go. Come on, sit up. Deep breaths. It's all right. I didn't expect you to do it the first time. That would have been remarkable. Here, eat this. You'll feel better.
That's one nasty Dementor.
Oh, no. That was a boggart, Harry. A boggart. The real thing would be worse. Much, much worse. As a matter of interest, what were you thinking? Which memory did you choose?
The first time I rode a broom.
Well, that's not good enough. Not nearly good enough.
There's another. It's not happy, exactly. Well, it is. It's the happiest I've ever felt. But it's complicated.
Is it strong? Then let's give it a try. You feel ready?
Just do it.
Expecto Patronum! Expecto Patronum!
Well done, Harry. Well done.
for today.
Yes, sit down. Here, eat this. It helps. It really helps. And just so you know, Harry, I think you would have given your father a run for his money. And that is saying something.
I was thinking of him. And Mum. Seeing their faces. They were talking to me. Just talking. That's the memory I chose. I don't even know if it's real. But it's the best I have.
This is the only spell that requires a memory. No other spell works like this. So she's up to something. Half the altars in the world, in any language, all have the same thing written or carved into them. Do you know what's written and carved into, I would actually probably say the majority of altars in the world? That's a phrase. Do this in remembrance of me. Have any of you ever seen that written on an altar? I'll close with this. When I reached this part, when I was breezing through the books, when I reached this scene, I literally had to stop reading because this charm explained the most miraculous moment that I'd had in my life to that point, that I'd never had an explanation for. And what it was, when I was 18 years old, my father was dying, and I was at college, and I came home to spend time with him, and I was with him, and I left the hospital, and he died just after I left. And when I got home, my mother said he died, and we got in the car and went back to the hospital. And the truth is, I was 18, I didn't realize there's actually a bureaucracy to death. She literally had to fill out forms at the nurse's station and stuff. And it had all happened about 20 minutes before. So I went back down to the room and I was just trying to retrace my steps. Can you imagine? Like, I just couldn't believe what had happened in 20 minutes. And when I went back to the room, it was a VA hospital. We didn't have any health insurance, so we were in a VA hospital. And when I got into the hospital room, because they don't have a lot of staff, he was there. I didn't expect that. I thought I was going to go to this empty room, with a made bed and just kind of have a moment, right? So I kind of walked in and have my moment. And there he was. And because of the VA hospital, I'm just going to be completely frank. No one had done anything. He was just lying there. And I was terrified and sad, and I didn't know what to do. I felt like I couldn't breathe. And all I remember to this day, I opened my mouth and I heard myself talking. And you know what came out? I believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all that is seen and unseen. And I just kept repeating the creed. I wasn't particularly religious, so it was kind of odd listening to myself say this, but as I said it, I then walked up to him. His arms were hanging off the bed. And I sort of put his arms back and closed his eyes. And I was able to start moving. And then I started to look at this body and be grateful to God that this body had carried that life. And then I started to sing some hymns that Father Jason and I grew up on. I sang Be Not Afraid and On Eagle's Wings and these cheesy 70s Catholic folk music. Can you imagine? Of course you can. And those of you who know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. I'm like belting it out. And the room felt larger. The windows got lighter. There was more air everywhere. And I never understood what happened in that room until I read about the Patronus charm. Because at that moment of terror, the memory that came to me is that God created the world, all things seen and unseen. And as soon as I remembered it, the dementors that had taken the life and the air out of the room pushed back. I never had a word for what happened, and I had it now. And I realized the Patronus charm. That's what the altar means when it says, do this in remembrance of me. Our Eucharistic prayer is a Patronus charm. We get together And we remember a memory together of sacrificial love. That's what his parents did for him. They died for him. When he said, I pictured them, he's picturing someone that died for him. So I leave you with this. When you go to church, think of it. If you're a real Harry Potter fan, when we recite the use on the night he was betrayed, that is our Patronus memory. And when we say it together, enough, and practice it in the room of requirement, one day when you literally face death, use that memory to remind you who you are and of all that is seen and unseen. I believe in the Patronus charm because it worked. I love the Eucharist because it works. Episcopalians, we are an evidence-based form of Christianity, which means, among other things, we love dinosaurs. Don't come to church because it's a good idea. Come to church because it's true and it works. And if you don't have that experience yet, I'll see you on Sunday. I literally actually will see you on Sunday because I'm preaching here. Thank you for coming out tonight.